Okay, I know you're a big fan of going back to the gold standard. If we do decide to go back on the gold standard, how do we do that?
Well, we're going to go back on the gold standard eventually. You know, it's not going to be our decision. It's going to be the market's decision. I think the world is likely to go on the gold standard before we do, even though we still supposedly have a lot of gold, because the US dollar is now the world reserve currency. Before the dollar was the reserve currency, gold was the monetary reserve, right? And we changed that, in Bretton Woods. But the reason we were able to get the world to follow us onto the dollar standard was because at the time, the US was the world's richest creditor nation. We had massive trade surpluses, or big creditor nation, and we had all the gold. We had all the factories. We were the big producer of manufactured goods, low-cost producer of everything manufactured was made in America. So we had a powerful economy, a real wealthy economy, and the dollar started to go up because of all the money we were printing, but the price of gold wasn't going up. All the other prices were going up. And so it was clear that gold was undervalued. And so our creditors got smart. De Gaulle and France in particular wanted his gold. It's just bullshit. You don't have any, and in fact, prices really started to go up because of all the money we were printing, but the price of gold wasn't going up. All the other prices were going up. And so it was clear that gold was undervalued. And so the world wanted their money. And then we went off the gold standard. Instead of doing the right thing, which would be to devalue the dollar officially to a point that the gold price would make sense, or to allow deflation so that prices would come down back in line with a $35 gold price, we did the worst thing possible. We went off the gold standard, and the price of gold went up to 850. We had all the inflation of the 1970s. They'd say, oh, if we're on a gold standard, we can't stimulate the economy in a recession. Exactly, because the stimulus doesn't work. It's actually a sedative. The government causes the recessions with the policies that it uses to get us out of the last recession. And instead of allowing the free market to cure the economy, government intervention makes it sicker.
So if somebody does believe that we're going to go back on gold standard, would this be a good time to buy gold?
Absolutely. Look, we can't go back on a gold standard at the current price of gold. The price of gold is going to have to be much higher.
Why is that?
It is today.
Why is that?
But because look at all the money that's in circulation. I mean, look, the other way to do it is if the price of everything else goes down. So if we allow complete deflation, if we allow prices to collapse and gold stays the same, then it can still work. But it has to do with relative. And in deflation, the government would destroy a lot of the money that's in circulation. So we can go back to a gold standard through massive deflation. I just don't think that's politically expedient.
For other people, non-central banks, people who are using gold or other currencies as a matter of course, I wouldn't get too excited about the idea of gold coming back as countries are looking for options that don't use the hubs and don't use the US dollar and don't use the euro or the yen or the pound. You got to think about why we have a currency system the way we do. Now, back in the bad old days, before 1970, we did use gold-backed, asset-backed currencies, and every single time we ever had one, it ended in collapse. Because one of the things that you generate whenever you have trade, whenever you have economic activity, is you have to have some means of exchanging it that preferably is not barter. And usually, historically speaking, we have used asset-backed currencies for that. But as growth picks up, as economic activity picks up, you need more and more and more and more and more of the currency until eventually you gobble up everything that is available. And when that happens, the currency itself starts to become a source of massive inflation, independent of the normal issues of supply and demand and logistics and labor and capital. When the currency itself becomes a brake on economic activity, you get a sharp crack in the system, usually a depression, and oftentimes state collapse. This has happened with every single asset-backed currency throughout human history. Now, you can make the argument that the fiat age, where countries like the United States government just say, this is what the dollar is worth and we'll maintain it, you can say that is a flawed system. That is fine, but it is by far better than all the other systems because the U.S. Federal Reserve, our monetary authority, has the ability to regulate the supply of the currency on a second-by-second basis. So if there's strong economic growth, if from the 1990s until now the U.S. economy expands by a factor of 3, then there's no problem for the Federal Reserve to triple the volume of the currency that is available for use. You can't do that with gold. There's another problem, of course. The daily global currency exchange is about 4 to 5 trillion U.S. equivalent. The U.S. economy is now $20 trillion. Global merchandise trade is over $25 trillion. All of the gold that the human race has mined in total in the last 6,000 years of history, it's only about 10 trillion. And only a few single-digit of percentages of that is available for use in any given day, because most of the world's gold is in things like wedding bands and museum exhibits and semiconductors. So not only theoretically is there not enough there, even if it was all pooled somehow, if we did go back to some sort of gold-based system, you would have a crushing impact on economic growth because you would have hyperinflation triggered by the currency itself. And this is one of those things that most of those people who think that we should move on to something beyond the dollar tend to miss, or think that we need to go back to a asset-backed system tend to miss. The human race in its current position with over 8 billion people and a combined global GDP of pushing $100 trillion cannot function without fiat currency.